Hey everybody, my name is Morgan and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm taking you on a journey of fertility, a journey to Mexico. It's not the traditional path, and it's certainly not for anybody, but I'm here to offer you an exclusive look at how my IVF journey in Mexico went. Let's dive in. In this video, I'll tell you why we went to Mexico to do IVF in the first place. I'll also tell you about the process of medical tourism in Mexico from start to finish, IVF version. And lastly, what no one told me that I wish I knew before I took this journey. The things I won't necessarily go over in this video are what IVF is and the specific medical stuff that happens through IVF. There are certainly medical professionals that can provide you with a lot better context and understanding than I can. I'm really here to focus on what it was like to go through the medical tourism in Mexico. All right, let's dive into my IVF journey. So let's start with the biggest question I get, and that's why the hell would you travel to Mexico for something as high stakes as IVF? There are two reasons why I decided to do something as high stakes as IVF in Mexico. The first, of course, is cost. In America, the price of IVF is the same as a luxury vehicle, and that's just for one round. The costs of IVF are insane here in the US. In fact, I did a side-by-side breakdown when I got back and realized that I'd saved over $20,000, even when you factor in costs such as my flight and hotel for a 2.5-week stay. Let me break it down for you. Here in Atlanta, my initial labs and ultrasound would have cost $1,374. Semen analysis for my husband would have cost $158. My HSG would have been $1,244. My retrieval and PGS would have been $16,388. My FET cycle, $5,082. And finally, my meds would have been $3,000 to $8,500. That's the one that kind of provides us with a range because different people have to take different amounts of medication depending on their bodies and various other medical factors. I would also like to state that there are a lot of things that clinics here in the United States add on, and those costs could be $1,288 plus. Add-ons can include things like additional ultrasounds or additional testing, etc. Your total for IVF in America comes out to $28,534 on the low side, up to $33,534 on the high side. And again, that's largely dependent on your medications. Regardless, this quote came from a top clinic here in Atlanta, Georgia. We are not the most expensive market, nor are we the least expensive market in America. And so I think that this provides a pretty healthy estimate for what the average American would pay for one round of IVF. Now let's contrast that to Mexico's pricing. In Mexico, I received my initial labs and ultrasound, my husband's semen analysis, our HSG, our retrieval and PGS, our FET cycle, our meds, and additional services, all for the cost of $7,500. Our hotel cost a total of $1,500 for the 15 nights, and our flights cost $1,800. Our flights were for myself, my husband twice, and our daughter, Valley. Now, of course, our daughter is an infant, so she does travel free, but there are taxes when bringing an infant into a different country, so that includes essentially the cost of her taxes. Our grand total for IVF in Mexico was $10,800, and this includes the implantation. So next year, when I go to implant, either in myself or in a surrogate, I've already prepaid for that service. And let's compare apples to apples. The clinic that I went to here in Atlanta is very renowned and respected in the city. Similarly, this was a top-tier facility in León, Mexico. And so in both cases, I was seeing the best doctors that the city had to offer. And that really gives us a side-by-side comparison of what the costs are for premium care in the US versus premium care in a different country like Mexico. The second reason I decided to do IVF in Mexico is that, like the rest of you, I have been consuming a lot of news lately. And after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I've been particularly concerned with women's reproductive rights and the rights of parents to do what they will with their embryos. It was very concerning to me to freeze embryos here in the United States with all of the uncertainty surrounding our current administration. I was really nervous that one day the government would come and tell me what to do with my frozen embryos, and that just wasn't a risk I was willing to take. So IVF abroad seemed like a really great option to both reduce my costs for IVF as well as ensure that I would have complete autonomy over my embryos. So how did I choose León? León is sort of like the Phoenix of Mexico. It's a large city, but it's not necessarily a tourist attraction. It is still very much a place for locals, and it's very much set up for the people who live in León and not necessarily for medical tourism. So although I hope this video does well, I don't think that people are going to be flocking to León anytime soon unless they are really interested in IVF with Dr. Aldo. Now that you know about the why, let's talk about the how. The first thing that we had to do to start our IVF journey is have a video consult with the doctor. My husband and I literally did this from our bed and had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Aldo at the Vida Institute in León, Mexico. Dr. Aldo, in English, explained to us step by step what was going to happen once we touched down in León. The initial investment for this consult was just $50 US, which we paid by wire after the appointment. The next step was simply to book the trip. My husband and I decided that he should not accompany me on the entire IVF journey. Instead, he came with me on the trip there, ensured that we were all settled into our Airbnb, and then left the following morning. So we took a flight out of Atlanta to León on a Sunday evening. It was myself, my husband, and our fantastic au pair at the time. And we arrived in León, where my husband and I dropped off all of our stuff at the Airbnb. My husband made sure that we were okay. And then we went to dinner with our friends, the architects at Groupthink. Shout out to Groupthink. From that first night, my husband felt comfortable enough to leave us there on our own, and he returned home the following morning. While he was on his flight home, I had my first in-person appointment with the doctor. We flew to León just before my menstrual cycle started, and that was timed properly. You want to start IVF when you are on day 1 of your cycle. And so I knew that I was going to be starting that Monday or Tuesday, and so we left on a Sunday night. Our first appointment with the doctor was absolutely incredible. In one day, I was able to go get my labs, get an ultrasound, and start my medications. So before I left the clinic, I had all of my meds in hand. I will say the Airbnb where we decided to stay on the first night was not great. It was perfectly lovely, but it had no AC. And I was sweating, my baby was sweating. The au pair said she slept great, but 2 out of the 3 of us were really uncomfortable. And so instead of staying at the Airbnb for 15 days, as we were originally planning, we decided to switch lodging to a luxury resort. This was not necessarily a super high-end luxury resort, but it was a resort nonetheless, and we loved the service there. We stayed at the Hotson, and I've actually since stayed there 2 more times, so I really, really loved this hotel. It's right in the middle of the city, and so it allowed us to have very easy access to the clinic as well as to other things that León has to offer, such as restaurants and shopping. So by day 3, it's me, my baby, and our fabulous au pair. And we actually were all about the town. We decided that we were going to make the most of our trip. And so we were everywhere. We went to some incredible restaurants such as Mochimo and Sato, which are just excellent and very affordable compared to nice restaurants here in the United States. We also decided that we were going to take some day trips in between doctor's appointments. So we ended up visiting San Miguel de Allende, which is a phenomenal little town about an hour and a half away from León. And we also stayed about 4 or 5 nights in Guanajuato, which is the capital of that state in Mexico. And we had an amazing time. We ate amazing food. We saw some beautiful sights. And it was my baby's first time out of the country. So it was so fun to watch her be so amused by absolutely everything around us. We really, really enjoyed ourselves by visiting all of the sites and being tourists for the 2 weeks that we were there. Another really special thing that we got to do was visit my mom's hometown. My mom is an American citizen, but she was raised in childhood in a really small village in a city called San Luis Potosí. So I actually got to go and see the village where my mom grew up, which was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity considering it's very, very remote. This is one of the few times that I would actually have a car. Shout out to Groupthink Architects who let me borrow the car the entire time we were there. That I would actually have a car to be able to drive into the countryside to visit her very, very, very clandestine town in the mountains. But it was quite amazing. We saw lots of cows. I saw where my mom grew up, and it was really cool driving around the town and having her tell me stories of her childhood, which was just such a special moment for me. And to be able to share it with my daughter was absolutely incredible. I was very, very fortunate in that I did not have a ton of side effects from the medications that I was taking for the actual IVF process. In fact, with the exception of pain at the site of injection and some light nausea in the last few days, I had a pretty easy IVF journey. Now, if I told you my birth story, you would not be jealous. So this is not necessarily something that everyone is going to experience the same, but I was able to travel throughout the entire time that I was taking my meds. Usually we left my medications in the hotel or wherever we were staying during the day so that I didn't risk ruining the meds. And then I would ensure to be back by the times that I needed to take my injections each day. So we were always very cognizant that we were there to do IVF, but we didn't let that stop us from being out about town. Again, not everyone will have this experience because some people will have side effects with their injections. I was just very fortunate in this case that my side effects were super minimal. Before my egg retrieval, I had not 1, but 2 follow-up appointments during which the doctor gave me 2 different ultrasounds. Now, these ultrasounds were essentially to track how big my follicles were getting. I believe he was counting follicles. Don't quote me on that. Doctors, you might want to chime in. But essentially, he was waiting for them to become a certain size so that he could time the egg retrieval properly. After the second visit, he decided that he was going to keep me on my medication a few more days so that I would have plenty of time for those follicles to mature. He then told me at our second follow-up visit that he would be performing the egg retrieval the following Sunday. So essentially, I had about 13 days of meds and then an egg retrieval right after that. And so that worked out really, really well. We were able to successfully retrieve 17 eggs. Now, I will say that the next time I get pregnant, I will be a geriatric pregnancy. So that will tell you my age, I'm 34 if you really need to know. And so 17 as a number for me was really excellent. It was something that I was really excited about. And from those 17, we actually were able to go ahead and get 5 healthy embryos. So right now we have frozen in Mexico 5 healthy embryos that have been completely genetically tested and are ready for implantation whenever my husband and I decide that we're ready to move forward with our second baby. The egg retrieval process was really pleasant, actually. I have listened to a New York Times podcast about egg retrievals gone horribly wrong. So I was absolutely terrified before my egg retrieval. I've had lots of surgeries in my life, so I'm not really sure why I was so scared, but I think that the podcast gave me just a really good scare. And so I went there slightly anxious and nervous about my egg retrieval. However, the anesthesiologist was really friendly. My doctor and I had already built a wonderful rapport, and I really trusted the team once I was actually on the table in the operating room. The clinic facilities are top notch. I felt that they were clean, they were sparkling, they were beautiful, they were high end, they were high tech. All of the things that you would want to see right before somebody puts you under anesthesia. After my egg retrieval, I was feeling so good that my mom and I went to brunch after. It worked out really well. We ate at this beautiful restaurant called Bosque, which feels like you're in a forest, and I felt great. We didn't have any complications afterward, nor did I experience anything that the doctor warned me to keep an eye out on. The day after my egg retrieval, I spent time researching plastic surgeons in León and visiting a few med spas. And then I came home that following Tuesday. Did I mention that my egg retrieval was on a Sunday? Yes, my doctor came in on a Sunday to do my egg retrieval, which was pretty incredible. So here are some things that I really want you to know. The first is that the medical care in Mexico was excellent. This is some of the best healthcare that I've ever personally experienced in my entire life. And I'm from LA, where we have renowned hospitals such as Cedars-Sinai. I now live in Atlanta, but I've also lived in New York, where we have renowned hospitals that I've been to. I've lived in London, where I've been to some of the top hospitals there. Yes, I have asthma. I'm always sick. It's just kind of my thing. And I really just felt so deeply cared for by this team. I felt like I was a priority to them. I never had to sit around and wait for 2 hours in a waiting room. And I never felt rushed. In fact, the doctor and I are on a WhatsApp basis. When I have questions or concerns, I'm able to just shoot him a quick text message on WhatsApp. I also have the medical assistant and nurses WhatsApps to be able to ask them questions just in case the doctor is unavailable. And that level of intimacy is just something that you don't find in American healthcare. So the first thing I want people to know is that you are in amazing hands abroad. The second thing I'd like you to note is that I totally did my research. My doctor is essentially the equivalent of board certified in Mexico's boards. So one of the things that I did as part of my research prior to leaving for León is I ensured to call the Mexican boards that provide doctors in Mexico with their licenses. And I just made sure that there were no weird, funky things going on with this particular doctor's license. I made sure that no one had lodged any complaints against him, etc. That was the way that I did my research to make sure that I was in very good hands. I also looked at tons of reviews, not only on my specific doctor, but on the clinic. Another thing I want you to note is that when you go abroad for medical care, you don't necessarily just work with one doctor. You might have one doctor leading the way, but every single time that I had any type of work done or an ultrasound, I usually had at least 2 OBGYNs in the room. The healthcare system works differently in different places, and so the way that we have residents and attendings here is very similar to the hierarchical structure in Mexico. And so at any given time, I had folks who were the equivalent of a resident or the equivalent of a fellow in the room with my doctor, who would be more like an attending. And so it felt really good to know that I always had 2 or 3 professional opinions in the room with me to make sure that we were making the best possible decisions around my care. Lastly, I would also like for you to note, I do speak fluent Spanish. My husband, however, does not. And so this was something that I was very concerned about because even though I speak Spanish and I'm not a no sabo kid, if you know, you know, I was very concerned about translating medical Spanish for my husband. Luckily, pretty much every attending doctor at the clinic speaks English, and so that was just never a concern. Most of our appointments were in English, and that was a huge benefit, especially when the doctor was trying to explain things to my husband, whose Spanish is questionable at best. And now for the lows. One of the things that I would absolutely change is my decision to stay at the Airbnb initially. I really should have just looked into a nice hotel, knowing that I was going to be in a city that I had never been to before, and knowing that I was going to be undergoing something as arduous as IVF. And so that was kind of on me. I definitely would recommend staying in a hotel, somewhere that has a refrigerator and other services and amenities available to you if you're going to be doing any type of medical tourism. The second thing that was difficult was not having my husband around with me the entire time. Again, I didn't have many side effects, but this was still a pretty emotional journey. The reasons that I ended up doing IVF have a lot to do with miscarriages in my past, and reflecting on those moments alone was a bit bittersweet because on the one hand, we were fortunate enough that I was able to retrieve 17 eggs. On the other hand, I didn't really get to deconstruct some of my grief with my partner. And that's something that if I had been in Atlanta, I would have been able to do. But my husband just wasn't able to miss 2 weeks with his own patients to be able to come with me to do IVF. The last thing I will caution you with is that I also had friends in this city. And so I was provided with a list of recommendations for restaurants, recommendations for where to sightsee. They let us borrow their second home in Guanajuato for a while. They gave me the lay of the land. And without that, I would have had to do a ton of research on how I was going to spend my days in León. So one of the things I will say is that you need to do research on how you want to spend your days. Otherwise, you're not really taking advantage of the tourism part of medical tourism. So regardless of where you decide to do your medical journey and what you decide to do there, I just definitely recommend that you treat it like a vacation that you plan out with sites that you want to visit and restaurants you want to eat at so that it becomes a really fun experience and not just about the treatment that you're getting. And now you know about my IVF journey in Mexico. I laughed, I cried, I ate churros, and I got to enjoy an amazing city filled with amazing healthcare professionals that ensure that my family and I are going to be able to expand in the very near future. IVF, it humbles you. IVF abroad, it humbles you in 2 languages. So thank you so much to Dr. Aldo and his team. It was such a pleasurable experience working with all of you. If you have any questions about my IVF journey in Mexico, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will be happy to respond. Until next time.